Hey, it's Austin from TurboLab. In this video, I wanted to demonstrate to you the difference between genuine quality rebuild kits versus upgraded aftermarket rebuild kits. What you may see in this video may absolutely surprise you, especially if you usually go with genuine rebuild kits.
This is an original 6.0 Powerstroke thrust bearing, and this is our aftermarket 6.0 thrust bearing. This is a full 360 degree thrust bearing. This one is just a 270 degree. So the idea behind this is that because you don't have a full 360 degree on the bearing, that it's more prone to wear and it won't dissipate heat as well. This is the genuine part, and then this is a non-genuine. This one's better because it has the full 360 degree, which will retain the whole shaft assembly with these thrust pads, the thrust collar and spacer. So it does a better job of being able to retain that because it has the full 360 degree surface. Now here's a S300 aftermarket thrust bearing, 360 degree. The only way that they ever came, I think, was at the 270 degree. However, I see that they're offering some 360 degree options now, but I don't know if that is factory or aftermarket or what. Now this was actually a pretty good thrust bearing from factory, being a 270 degree, because it's so thick. So it actually holds up pretty well with factory applications, but if you do try and push more than aftermarket boost on either of these thrust bearings, usually you'll see a problem. This one being steel, it will actually overheat really bad and usually just wears out because of that. Next, here's a Borgwarner KO3 thrust bearing. This is a factory thrust bearing, and this is our aftermarket triple oil port thrust bearing. This one could not be better designed if you're looking to have your turbo fail every time you want to turn up the boost. This is a thrust bearing out of a factory Mazda Speed 3 turbo. So people are going out there and turning their boost up to 22 psi or whatever. Around 20 psi, this thrust bearing will give out and fail. The reason why is because it's not a full 360 degree. It has this cutout here to where the thrust pads or the thrust collar and spacer don't have a full area to lay on against this bearing. It also only has a single oil port in it, where our upgraded kit or upgraded thrust bearing has 3 oil ports. Next, I want to move on to the Mitsubishi frame. This is an original TDO3 thrust bearing, and there's nothing really that wrong with these, but these are actually a great thrust bearing. They hold up pretty well, but when you start to use aftermarket compressor wheels where their rotating assemblies are a lot heavier, then they start to fail. The reason why is because these are only designed for so much rotating mass, but when you have a larger compressor wheel, a larger turbine wheel, usually it starts to fail on you. Now this has a single oil port, and I know this is a TDO5 versus a TDO3. I couldn't find my TDO5 standard thrust bearing, which looks just like this, but it's this size. So this one is 2 oil port. This is our aftermarket thrust bearing. So it's 2 oil port, and it's of course 360 degree from factory anyway. There's nothing really that much different besides the 2 oil ports. And we also have different thrust pads for them, or a thrust collar and spacer. This is the factory collar or spacer, whichever, and this is our aftermarket collar. This is 14 this one's 14 millimeter and this one's an 18 millimeter. What this does is it provides more surface area on the thrust bearing, which helps prevent it from failing. Now here's the factory collar and the aftermarket collar. The difference is you don't have a full 18 millimeter surface area on the thrust bearing. So our little collar here is cut for a full 18 millimeters of surface area on this thrust bearing. and that helps it prevent from failing. If we didn't have this as an upgrade, you'll see a lot of failures, especially with just the 20G turbo upgrade. It will fail if you don't use this upgraded rebuild kit. I hope you learned something in this video, because this is really a common misunderstood thing. All the genuine parts I showed you here aren't very good quality, but they're okay for factory boost and factory application. However, if you're trying to do aftermarket boost or do a turbo upgrade, you really do need these upgraded parts. If you want to do more than 20 psi on the factory thrust bearing with a compressor wheel upgrade for the Mitsubishi, that turbo will fail if you do not use an upgraded thrust bearing. Same with this application too. Now, this one may be okay, but I really don't know as much about the S300 stuff. I usually don't like to mess with it because they're really hard to get parts for besides the rebuild kits. The reason why I'm making this video in the first place is because I had somebody call me about a 7.3 turbo that he was doing an upgrade on, but he wasn't doing a rebuild, and he said that the compressor wheel was hitting the compressor housing for some unknown reason. And anyway, he asked me if I thought that the thrust bearing was bad, and I told him, well, that's really the only thing that it could be, because nothing else really added up. Because he told me that he put it back together with the factory compressor wheel and it still rubbed the compressor housing. So the conversation went on where he said that, well, I told him, I have a rebuild kit for that, and yeah, it's 360 degree with the brass bearing. That way you don't have an issue with too much heat on the thrust bearing causing it to wear out like the factory bearing. But then he told me that he read some bad reviews of people that, I don't know, I guess installed it themselves, and I guess there's a bunch of do-it-yourselfers that don't do it right. I don't know. But anyway, so he's like, yeah, I only go with the genuine kit because the bad reviews on the other kit or whatever. I don't know if it was my kit or somebody else's. But anyway, I got to thinking, why would he need a thrust bearing in the first place if his genuine kit was so good? And then there really is no answer for that. It just didn't really make sense why he would go back with the stock thrust bearing if the stock thrust bearing had a failure in the first place. But anyway, hopefully you guys learned something out of this video, and if you want to, you can leave a comment below or even like this video if it was helpful to you.